Hello everyone, in this video, we're going to take a deep dive into cy.intercept, one of the most powerful and important commands in Cypress. Cy.intercept allows you to spy on, control, and stub network requests and responses during test execution. In other words, it gives you full control over HTTP traffic in your tests. You can use it to simply observe requests, wait for them to finish, modify requests on the fly, or completely replace real backend responses with mock data. This is especially useful when your application heavily depends on APIs, authentication, or third-party services. Before cy.intercept was introduced, Cypress used CI route, but cy.intercept is now the recommended and more flexible solution. It works with all HTTP methods, supports REST and GraphQL, and allows very fine-grained control over requests. In this video, we'll explore cy.intercept using a real-world project example. We'll be testing the login functionality of a web application and step-by-step see how this command can be applied in practical scenarios. First, we'll look at how to track HTTP requests. Using cy.intercept, we can listen to specific network calls, for example, a post request to login, and assign it an alias. With that alias, we can then use cy.wait to pause the test until the request completes, making our test more reliable and eliminating flaky timing issues. Next, we'll move on to mocking server responses. Cypress allows you to stub a response entirely, returning custom JSON data, setting specific status codes, or adding artificial delays. This is extremely useful when the backend is unstable, slow, or not yet implemented. By mocking responses, you can test your UI in isolation and ensure consistent test results. After that, we'll cover error handling scenarios. With cy.intercept, you can easily simulate server errors like 401, 403, or 500 responses. This lets you verify how your application behaves when something goes wrong. For example, whether it shows the correct error message or prevents the user from logging in. We'll also look at validating request data. Cypress allows you to inspect the request body, headers, and query parameters inside cy.intercept. This means you can assert that the front end is sending the correct payload, such as an email and password, before the request even reaches the backend. Finally, we'll briefly touch on more advanced features, like conditional logic inside intercept handlers, dynamic responses based on request data, and the difference between spying on requests versus stubbing them. The video is structured from simple concepts to more advanced use cases, so it's perfect if you're just getting started with Cypress, but it will also be valuable if you already have experience and want to write more robust, predictable, and maintainable end-to-end tests. Let's get started. This test verifies a successful login process while intercepting the authentication HTTP request using cy.intercept. The first step is to intercept the login request. Cypress starts listening for all post requests to the /login endpoint and assigns the request an alias called login request. This gives us control over when the request executes. Later, we can wait for it to complete, check the response status, or analyze the request and response data. At this stage, the request hasn't been sent yet. We are only preparing to intercept it. Next, we perform the login. A custom command called ci.login is executed. Inside this command, cookies and local storage are cleared, the login page is opened, the username and password are entered, and the login button is clicked. As a result, the application sends a post request to /login. This request is automatically intercepted by Cypress because we declared cy.intercept earlier. After that, we wait for the request to complete and check the response. cy.wait pauses the test execution until the login request finishes. We then access the server response and verify that the HTTP status code is 200. This is important because the test will not proceed until the server responds, explicitly confirming that the authentication was successful at the backend level. This makes the test stable and predictable. Finally, we verify the UI after login. Cypress searches for the navigation bar logo element and checks that it is visible on the page. This confirms that the user successfully logged in, the application navigated to the authenticated area, and the UI rendered correctly. In summary, this test verifies two levels at once. On the back end, the login request was sent and returned a status code of 200. On the front end, the user sees the interface after authentication. This approach is considered best practice for end-to-end tests using Cypress and cy.intercept. This test demonstrates how to handle login errors using cy.intercept in Cypress. The goal is to verify that the application shows the correct error message when the login API returns a 401 unauthorized response. The first step is to mock an authorization error. Using cy.intercept, we intercept all post requests to the /login endpoint and stub the response with a status code of 401. The response body contains an error message saying invalid username or password. This request is given an alias called login error. By doing this, we can simulate a failed login attempt without actually contacting the backend. Next, we attempt to log in by calling a custom command ci.login with the username Costa and a deliberately incorrect password, wrong password. Because we previously set up the intercept, this request will be automatically intercepted and replaced with the mocked 401 response. After sending the request, we use cy.wait at login error to pause test execution until the intercepted request completes. We then access the response object and assert that the HTTP status code is 401. This step ensures that the backend returned an error, making our test reliable and predictable. The fourth step is to check the user interface. We use CI-get to find the element containing the error message and verify that it displays the text "username or password is invalid." This confirms that the front end properly handles the error response and provides feedback to the user. Finally, we verify that the user was not redirected to the dashboard page. By asserting that the current URL does not include /dashboard, we confirm that the application correctly prevents navigation after a failed login attempt. In summary, this test validates error handling at both the backend and front-end levels. On the backend, the login request returns a 401 status code. On the front end, the user sees the appropriate error message, and navigation is blocked. This approach demonstrates best practices for testing failure scenarios with Cypress and cy.intercept, ensuring that your application behaves correctly even when errors occur. This test demonstrates how to use a mocked server response with CI.intercept in Cypress to simulate a successful login. The goal is to verify both the back-end request and the front-end behavior without relying on a real server. The first step is to mock the login request. Using CI.intercept, we intercept all post requests to the /login endpoint and replace the server response with a predefined object. In this mocked response, the HTTP status code is 200, indicating a successful login. The response body contains a user object with an ID and username, as well as a fake JWT token. We give this request the alias mocklogin. By mocking the response, we can test the login flow without actually calling the real backend, which makes the test faster, more stable, and fully controlled. Next, we perform the login by calling a custom command cy.login with the username Costa and password 104. Because we previously set up the intercept, this login request is automatically intercepted and replaced with the mocked response. This allows us to simulate a successful login scenario, even if the backend is unavailable or still under development. After sending the login request, we use CI wait at mock login to pause the test until the mocked request completes. We then check the response object and assert that the HTTP status code is 200. This confirms that the application correctly sent the request and received a successful response, even though it was mocked. Finally, we verify the front-end behavior. Using c.get, we check that the navigation bar logo element is visible on the page. This confirms that after a successful login, the user is redirected to the authenticated area of the application and that the UI renders correctly. It's important to note that when a user logs into the Cypress Real World App during a test, they are always treated as logging in for the first time. Cypress runs tests in a completely clean and isolated browser environment. Before each test, cookies, local storage, session storage, and any previous application state are cleared automatically. This ensures that each test starts with a fresh state, independent of any previous tests. That's why even if a user was logged in during a previous test, Cypress will treat them as a first-time user in the next test. This behavior guarantees test isolation, predictability, and prevents one test from affecting another, which is a key best practice in end-to-end testing. In summary, this test validates the login process using a mocked server response. On the back end, the login request returns a successful 200 status code and a predefined user object. On the front end, the application behaves as if a real login occurred, showing the appropriate UI elements. Using mocks like this is a best practice in Cypress for creating stable, predictable end-to-end tests, especially when back-end services are unreliable, unavailable, or still under development. Treating users as first-time logins ensures full isolation and prevents flakiness, making each test independent and reliable. This test demonstrates how to validate the request body of a login API call using cy.intercept in Cypress. The goal is to ensure that the front end sends the correct credentials to the back end when a user attempts to log in. The first step is to intercept the login request. Using cy.intercept, we listen for all post requests to the /login endpoint. Inside the intercept handler, we inspect the request body and assert that it contains the correct username and password properties. In this case, we expect username to be Costa and password to be password104. After validating the request, we call rec.continue to allow the request to proceed normally. This ensures that the application behaves as it would in a real scenario, while still verifying the correctness of the data sent to the server. Next, we perform the login by calling a custom ci.login command. This sends the post request to /login, which is intercepted by the handler we set up. We then use ci.wait at login request to pause the test until the request completes. Finally, we verify that the UI behaves correctly after login by checking that the navigation bar logo is visible. This confirms that the login was successful and that the application properly handled the request. Validating the request body is particularly useful in scenarios where the front end needs to send specific data formats, include additional headers, or pass custom tokens. For example, you could also validate that a login request includes a Remember Me flag, or that a registration request sends the correct email and password fields. Another example is verifying that API calls for updating a user profile send the expected data before it reaches the server, preventing potential bugs caused by incorrect payloads. Using cy.intercept in this way makes tests more robust and transparent. It allows you to catch front-end bugs early by ensuring that the application sends the exact data the backend expects. This is especially convenient when working with complex forms, dynamic payloads, or APIs with strict validation rules. In summary, this test not only checks that the login process works from the user's perspective, but also ensures that the data sent to the server is correct. This dual-level validation, both front-end behavior and request integrity, makes your end-to-end tests more reliable and maintainable. By leveraging cy.intercept for request body validation, you gain fine-grained control over network interactions, catch subtle errors, and make your tests more predictable.